Picture this. It's 50,000 BC. You've been walking all day. The sun just dropped below the tree line, temperatures falling fast, and the only thing standing between you and a very bad night is a fire your group managed to keep going. No shelter beyond what you built. No food beyond what you found. Just the fire, the dark pressing in around it, and a column of smoke that goes wherever the wind decides. And at some point, nobody planned this. Nobody wrote it down. One of your ancestors caught a lungful of smoke from a particular plant and felt something shift. Not pain, not coughing, something almost the opposite. And they remembered it. That moment might be where this whole thing starts. Not with cigarettes, not with colonial ships or tobacco plantations or any of the machinery we normally attach to the word smoking. The actual origin is stranger and older than all of that, because the urge to inhale smoke might be built into us at a level that predates every institution, every language, every civilization that shows up in any history class you've ever sat through. The evidence for that is genuinely unsettling, so let's go through it. You can't smoke anything without fire. That sounds obvious, but the timeline of fire in human history is so long it stops feeling real pretty quickly. The oldest confirmed evidence of controlled fire use by our ancestors comes from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, dating back roughly 1 million years. Archaeologists pulled up burnt plant ash and charred bone, not the aftermath of a wildfire, but the remains of a deliberate, sustained fire built and maintained inside an enclosed cave. 1 million years. That number doesn't shrink the more you sit with it. The species doing this wasn't even Homo sapiens. It was Homo erectus, an earlier branch of the human family tree with a smaller brain and no way to know that what they were doing around that fire would echo forward through 1 million years of descendants. They cooked meat. They stayed warm. They slept in shifts around the flames. And every single one of them breathed smoke constantly because there was no other option. For hundreds of thousands of years, inhaling smoke wasn't a habit. It was just what being near a fire meant. But not all smoke does the same thing. That's the part that changes everything. When organic matter burns, the chemistry gets complicated fast. Depending on what's actually in the fire, combustion can release alkaloids, terpenes, and other compounds that cross into the bloodstream through the lungs and interact directly with the nervous system. Some of those interactions are, to put it mildly, noticeable. Early humans sitting around fires in forested environments where cannabis, wild tobacco relatives, and dozens of other psychoactive plants grew naturally were regularly inhaling smoke that wasn't just wood smoke. Some of it was doing something to their brains. They had no framework for understanding why they suddenly felt lighter, or calmer, or like the world had gotten slightly more interesting. The brain was already wired for it. Your body runs an endocannabinoid system, a network that handles mood, memory, and appetite. And it was running long before any human consciously chose to inhale anything. The receptors were already there, so the first time a prehistoric person caught smoke from a burning cannabis plant, their brain didn't flag it as an intruder. It just responded. The neurological equivalent of a door that was already unlocked. That's probably how this started. Not a plan, not a ritual. A warm accident that felt good enough to repeat, and got repeated until someone started doing it on purpose. Every ceremony, every medical use, every industry built on top of it. All of it may trace back to someone stumbling into the right campfire at the right moment and having a very surprising evening. Now, there's a real gap between ancient humans occasionally inhaled psychoactive smoke by accident, and ancient humans deliberately sought that out. So, what does the physical evidence actually show? The first thing to understand is how badly organic material preserves over time. Stone tools from 3 million years ago still exist because stone is basically permanent. But a wooden pipe, a pouch of dried leaves, a clay bowl with plant residue, those are gone in centuries under normal soil conditions. So every time researchers say the earliest confirmed evidence of X dates to Y, what they mean is that's the oldest thing they've found so far. The absence of older evidence doesn't mean older use didn't happen. It means older use didn't leave anything behind that lasted. With that caveat, the oldest confirmed physical evidence of intentional cannabis inhalation comes from the Pamir Mountains in Central Asia, around 500 BC. Wooden braziers, superheated stones, and residue from high THC cannabis, all found together inside a ritual burial site. This wasn't cannabis gathered for fiber or seeds. It was the cultivated, potent variety, placed deliberately in a ceremonial context. Someone knew exactly what it did. Herodotus wrote about the same culture in the same century. He described Scythian nomads from the Eurasian steppe building small enclosed tents, heating stones until they glowed, and throwing hemp directly onto them, then sitting inside and breathing the smoke until they were, in his words, howling with pleasure. Historians spent centuries assuming he was embellishing. Then excavations of Scythian burial mounds turned up bronze braziers, heated stones, and hemp residue, matching his account almost exactly. The archaeology and the written record landed on the same answer independently. He wasn't exaggerating, he was reporting. Tobacco is a separate story entirely, tied to a different continent. Nicotiana, the plant genus tobacco comes from, is native to the Americas. That one fact has enormous consequences, because it means Europe, Africa, and Asia had no contact with tobacco until 1492. When Columbus's crew landed in the Caribbean, they encountered Taino people using rolled dried leaves to inhale and exhale smoke. The crew had no category for what they were watching. They still tried it within a few weeks, because that's apparently a reliable constant in human nature. But tobacco in the Americas was ancient before any of that. Chemical residues in ancient pipes trace confirmed use back at least 3,500 years in the southeastern United States. And some researchers put the beginnings of cultivation closer to 10,000 years ago in the Amazon basin. And in those cultures, tobacco wasn't casual. It was sacred. Shamans didn't smoke recreationally. They used it to open ritual space, to carry prayers, to move between the everyday world and whatever they understood to be beyond it. The idea of tobacco as something you do out of boredom is almost entirely a European invention, and a very recent one. Then in 2019, a discovery in the Great Salt Lake Desert pushed the timeline back further than anyone expected. A hearth, roughly 12,000 years old, containing concentrated seeds from Nicotiana attenuata, a wild North American tobacco species, not scattered by wind, placed deliberately. The site predates any known pipes or pottery in the region by thousands of years, so whatever was happening, it wasn't happening through the tools we usually connect to smoking. 12,000 years ago, someone in the Utah desert was putting tobacco into a fire. And if that was happening in North America, the obvious question is, what were people doing with their local psychoactive plants on every other continent at the same time? Humans were everywhere by then. Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia. The drive to alter consciousness doesn't belong to one culture. It runs through all of them. Every continent, every era, every culture with no contact with the others. All of them found some way to do this. That pattern needs an explanation, and anthropologists have been sitting with it for decades. Anthropologists have one. It's sometimes called the intoxication hypothesis. The core argument, the pursuit of altered states is so consistent across human societies, fermented drinks, smoked plants, chewed leaves, eaten fungi, that it's hard to chalk up to coincidence or independent invention. Some researchers think it's a drive, hardwired, not a quirk of any one culture. Ronald Siegel, a psychopharmacologist, argued in the 1980s that intoxication functions as a fourth biological drive alongside hunger, thirst, and sex, built into the operating system, not installed later by circumstance. The harder to dismiss part of this is that the behavior shows up in other species. Elephants seek out fermented fruit deliberately. Siberian reindeer eat Amanita muscaria mushrooms and then consume the urine of other reindeer who ate them first, because the active compounds survive digestion intact. Reindeer, in the Siberian wilderness, independently figured out drug recycling. That's not a cultural phenomenon. That's biology. If the drive runs that deep across species, then early humans deliberately seeking smoke from psychoactive plants starts to look less like a quirk and more like a predictable outcome, almost inevitable given enough time and enough fires. Medicine adds another layer. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical documents ever recovered, dates to ancient Egypt around 1550 BC. It describes inhaling heated herbal smoke to treat throat and lung conditions. That sounds backwards from a modern standpoint. Smoke for lung problems, but the specific plants cited, henbane and several aromatics, do have measurable pharmacological effects when inhaled. The logic wasn't crazy. The lungs are a fast delivery route, and if the plant has a useful compound, burning it gets that compound into the bloodstream quickly. Inhalers and nebulizers use the same reasoning today. The burning didn't survive. The delivery logic did. Ancient Indian Ayurvedic texts describe a formal practice called dhumapana, smoke drinking, with detailed protocols, specific plant pairings for specific conditions, and centuries of refinement behind them. The same logic shows up in ancient China, ancient Mesopotamia, and ancient Greece. Across every early civilization on record, deliberately inhaling smoke for therapeutic purposes was recognized medical practice, not a fringe habit, standard medicine. The social piece is the one that gets overlooked most. Humans evolved in groups where cohesion wasn't a preference. It was a survival requirement. Isolated individuals didn't last. Groups did. Anything that built trust and coordination between people had genuine adaptive value. Shared ritual, including shared psychoactive experience, is one of the most effective trust-building mechanisms humans ever developed. Modern neuroscience backs this up. Shared altered states synchronize neural activity and deepen group identity in ways that are measurable and lasting. The group that sat together in smoke and came out the other side of a shared experience was the group that could function as a unit when things went bad. It wasn't recreation, it was social architecture, which is what makes the industrial turn so jarring. Tobacco reached Europe in the 1500s and spread continent-wide in decades. By the early 1900s, machine-manufactured cigarettes had made tobacco consumption cheaper and more addictive than anything that existed before. What took thousands of years to develop as a careful, sacred practice was re-engineered into a mass-market product in a few centuries. The industry that built itself on that product then spent decades suppressing its own internal research on the health consequences, marketing to children, bringing in doctors to endorse their brands, and chemically tuning nicotine delivery to maximize addiction speed. A shaman placing cannabis on heated stones in 500 BC, and a tobacco executive in 1960 approving those campaigns both worked with smoke. That's where the similarities end. So when did humans actually start smoking? We don't know, and we probably won't ever get a precise answer. The physical record takes us back 12,000 years with real confidence. The behavioral drives underneath it are almost certainly older, possibly as old as the first time a human ancestor noticed that a particular fire felt different from the others. What's clear is that by the time writing existed anywhere on Earth, smoking was already old. The plants varied, the rituals varied, the purposes varied, but the behavior was already embedded, already passed down through generations of lived experience that never got recorded because nobody needed to record it. They just knew. That continuity is one of the stranger things about being human. Across all the distance between now and 50,000 BC, some things ran unbroken the whole way through. Fire is one of them. Smoke is another. The impulse to notice what that smoke does and then choose it again. That's not a recent habit. It's one of the oldest things we do.